Danielle Harper saw her husband hand their private black card to another woman 12 seconds before the necklace purchase was declined. She stood near the entrance of the Fifth Avenue boutique, still wearing the navy coat from a nonprofit meeting across the street, while Ethan watched Vanessa Cole admire a diamond necklace in the mirror. The sales associate smiled as Vanessa accepted the card, unaware that Ethan had given it to Danielle on their 10th wedding anniversary with a note folded behind it. "Everything I build belongs to us." Back then, the account had contained very little, but Ethan had promised the balance would change while the meaning never would. Now Vanessa inserted the card into the terminal, and Danielle's phone displayed an alert asking whether she wanted to approve the purchase. She pressed freeze account, then remained behind a marble column long enough to hear the machine reject the card twice. Ethan removed another card and completed the purchase, pretending the failure was a routine banking problem, although his expression had changed. Vanessa asked whether Danielle controlled the account, and Ethan answered quietly enough that Danielle could not hear every word. She left before either of them noticed her, stepping into the cold Manhattan afternoon without the confrontation she had once imagined she would demand. The affair did not shock her as much as the calm inside her, because for months she had watched Ethan return home later, protect his phone, and turn ordinary questions into arguments about pressure. She had kept waiting for a single fact strong enough to justify what she already understood. The necklace, the card, and the look on his face had finally provided it. Her driver had barely reached the Hudson River when Ethan began calling. Danielle ignored the first 3 attempts, then opened the banking application and reviewed the account connected to the frozen card. She rarely used it, but she remained an equal signer because it also funded the Women's Renewal Project, a financial education program she had created during Calloway Capital's early years. Several recent purchases matched the places Ethan had claimed were business dinners, yet one group of transactions looked unfamiliar. Over 6 months, nearly $2 million had been sent to outside training firms, although Danielle had met that morning with women whose grants had been reduced because the program supposedly lacked funding. She downloaded the statements before calling Margaret Ellis, a family attorney recommended by a trusted colleague. Margaret did not ask whether Danielle still loved her husband or whether the marriage could be repaired. She asked whether Danielle believed money might be moved after Ethan realized she had found the charges. Danielle admitted she did not know, which frightened her more than the affair. Margaret instructed her not to transfer funds or accuse anyone until an independent accountant could preserve the records. She explained that the unusual payments might be legitimate, misclassified, or connected to something more serious, but assumptions could damage Danielle if the dispute reached court. Danielle stared at the transactions while the river moved beyond the car window, understanding that the card had exposed 2 betrayals at once. One was painfully clear, while the other still had no face. Ethan waited in the townhouse living room that evening, with the black card resting on the table between them. He began by apologizing for the boutique, saying the relationship with Vanessa had lasted several months and had started during a period when he and Danielle barely spoke. Danielle asked whether their silence had forced him to lie, buy jewelry, or use an account created around their marriage. Ethan lowered his eyes and admitted that none of it could be defended. His honesty came too late to feel brave, but it prevented the conversation from becoming another argument about what Danielle had failed to provide. She placed the account statements beside the card and asked why the Women's Renewal Project had paid consulting firms she did not recognize. Ethan reviewed the pages, then said Vanessa had recently taken responsibility for several charitable partnerships because Danielle was preparing to launch an independent nonprofit. He believed the transfers covered workshops, outreach, and grant administration. Danielle pointed out that one vendor shared an address with a private event company used for Vanessa's birthday celebration. Ethan read the line again, and the confidence left his face. He called the company's chief financial officer, but Danielle stopped him before the call connected. She explained that anyone involved would have time to alter records if warned too early. Ethan accused her of treating him like a suspect, then looked at the jewelry receipt, still visible inside his coat pocket, and seemed to hear the weakness in his protest. Danielle told him an independent review would begin that night, and that he could cooperate or allow his refusal to speak for him. Before Ethan answered, his phone displayed a message from Vanessa. Danielle could not see the full text, only the first sentence appearing across the locked screen. She knows about the account. We need to move before morning. Ethan stared at the message until the screen went dark, then unlocked the phone and handed it to Danielle without being asked. The full exchange contained no confession, only Vanessa urging him to call the audit committee before Danielle created a story that could damage the company. Ethan said he had never discussed the missing funds with her, which meant Vanessa either knew Danielle had reviewed the statements or expected the frozen card to lead there. Danielle asked how much access Vanessa possessed. Ethan admitted she supervised the foundation staff, approved vendors below a set limit, and often prepared documents for his electronic signature. None of those powers allowed her to move millions alone, but together, they gave her room to hide ordinary-looking payments inside a large organization. Margaret arrived with Lena Ortiz, a forensic accountant whose manner was practical rather than dramatic. Lena copied the account records, documented the black card, and asked Ethan to provide foundation emails and vendor lists without notifying company counsel until the preservation work was complete. Ethan objected because the files included confidential business information, while Danielle reminded him that confidentiality had already become a shelter for behavior he preferred not to examine. Margaret limited the review to the Women's Renewal Project and warned both spouses that cooperation did not protect either of them from what the records might show. Ethan finally agreed, then moved to the far end of the dining room while Lena opened years of transactions at the table where Danielle had once helped him build his first budgets. The missing money had not vanished through an elaborate international scheme. It had been hidden through inflated invoices from 3 small vendors that claimed to provide workshops, transportation, and grant support. 2 vendors performed some legitimate work, but charged for events that never occurred, or listed hundreds of participants who could not be verified. The third company belonged to Vanessa's older brother Caleb, who had struggled for years to keep his event business alive. Payments to Caleb's firm began 11 months earlier, long before the affair, then increased after Vanessa gained greater control of Ethan's schedule. Lena found repeated approvals bearing Danielle's digital signature, even though Danielle had stopped reviewing foundation expenses nearly 2 years earlier. The signature came from an old security token connected to a laptop Danielle had used when the program operated from her home office. Ethan remembered authorizing staff to collect outdated equipment during a townhouse renovation, but he did not know where the laptop had gone afterward. Company records listed it as transferred to the foundation department, then retired without a destruction receipt. Vanessa had not invented access from nothing. She had noticed a careless gap and used it. Danielle felt anger toward Vanessa, but also toward herself for allowing a program carrying her name to continue without oversight, because Ethan had assured her the company would protect it. Shortly before sunrise, Ethan called Vanessa and asked her to meet in his office. Margaret arranged for the conversation to be recorded with Ethan's consent, while Danielle listened from the townhouse through a secure connection. Ethan began with the failed jewelry purchase, allowing Vanessa to believe the conversation concerned the affair. She blamed Danielle for humiliating them publicly, even though no one at the boutique had known she was present. Ethan asked how Vanessa knew Danielle had seen the purchase, and Vanessa answered that only Danielle could have frozen the card so quickly. He then placed one of Caleb's invoices on the desk. Vanessa did not panic or confess. She said her brother had delivered workshops under pressure, that record-keeping at small vendors was often imperfect, and that Danielle's signatures approved every payment. Ethan asked where she obtained Danielle's old security token. Vanessa's expression tightened, but she replied that equipment management belonged to information technology, not her. When Ethan mentioned the vendor address matching her birthday venue, she accused him of searching for financial wrongdoing to make his affair seem less important. "You cheated because you wanted to," she said. "Do not turn me into a criminal so you can feel like somebody tricked you." The accusation landed because Ethan knew the first half was true. He told Vanessa she was suspended pending an outside review and asked her to leave her company devices. She surrendered the phone and laptop, then walked out without pleading for him or threatening Danielle. Her composure made the situation feel less resolved rather than more. An hour later, Vanessa sent a complaint from her personal email to the board's audit chair. She claimed Danielle had continued directing the Women's Renewal Project after leaving the company and used private vendors to finance the nonprofit she planned to launch. Attached were Danielle's forged approvals, photographs from legitimate meetings, and a draft lease for her new Brooklyn office. Vanessa had not built a perfect trap, but she had prepared enough evidence to create doubt if anyone questioned the payments. By breakfast, the audit committee had suspended Ethan's access, frozen the charitable account, and scheduled an emergency review. Danielle's new nonprofit had not yet opened, but a reporter was already asking whether it had been funded with money stolen from the women it claimed to serve. Danielle stood inside the unfinished Brooklyn office, while a contractor installed shelves she might no longer be able to pay for. 3 employees waited near the borrowed conference table, trying not to stare at the news alert identifying her as a possible beneficiary of missing charitable funds. The article carefully avoided accusing her outright, yet repeated enough of Vanessa's claims to make every denial sound defensive. A regional bank postponed Danielle's credit application within an hour, and 2 donors requested proof that none of their contributions had passed through Calloway Capital. Margaret advised silence until Lena completed the review, but silence felt unbearable when Danielle's name had become the easiest part of the story to publish. Ethan called from company headquarters, where the board had placed him on temporary leave because his affair created a conflict in the investigation. He offered to release a statement saying Danielle had no role in the payments. She asked whether he possessed evidence strong enough to prove that, and he admitted he did not yet. Danielle refused to let him defend her through marital loyalty, because Vanessa's complaint already suggested their personal relationship had protected financial misconduct. She told him the company needed an independent investigation and that Ethan should disclose the affair before someone else used it to control the timing. He resisted, worried about employees and investors, until Danielle asked how many bad decisions he intended to excuse by placing innocent people in front of them. The board announced Ethan's leave that afternoon. Financial reporters focused on the affair, the missing funds, and the frozen card, transforming private humiliation into an easy public narrative. Vanessa's attorney released a statement denying fraud and describing her relationship with Ethan as consensual but irrelevant to the foundation's finances. The language separated her from the emotional scandal while placing Danielle closer to the money. For the first time, Danielle understood that Vanessa's greatest advantage was not brilliance. It was the fact that everyone else had something embarrassing they wanted hidden. The investigation changed when Erica Johnson, a bakery owner who had completed Danielle's financial training years earlier, arrived at the Brooklyn office carrying a folder of emails. Vanessa's staff had asked Erica to sign reports confirming attendance at workshops that never happened, offering a small promotional grant in return. Erica refused because the reports listed Danielle as program chair, although she assumed the request reflected disorganization rather than theft. Several other graduates received similar forms, and one had attended an event where participants were photographed for publicity before being sent home because no instructor arrived. The vendors had done just enough visible work to make the false billing harder to recognize. Danielle met the women at Erica's bakery after closing, where they spread emails and grant notices across a flour-dusted table. Some feared losing future funding if they challenged Calloway Capital, while others worried that reporters would expose their financial histories. Danielle told them nobody owed her public loyalty and that their decisions should protect their own families first. Erica looked at her for a long moment, then reminded Danielle that the training program had taught them to question agreements they did not understand. "We are not doing this because you need saving," Erica said. "We are doing it because our names were used too." Their evidence proved that services had been exaggerated, but it did not establish who forged Danielle's signature. Lena traced the old laptop to an equipment storage room managed by a foundation employee named Owen Price, who had recently resigned after Vanessa blamed him for missing records. Owen agreed to speak only after receiving written protection from the company. He admitted that Vanessa asked him to recover Danielle's security token from the retired laptop, claiming Danielle had authorized its use until new foundation credentials were created. Owen followed the instruction twice, then became suspicious when Vanessa continued requesting approvals months later. He had saved one email in which Vanessa wrote that Danielle was too busy launching her own organization to review routine paperwork. The message did not admit theft, but it proved Vanessa knowingly used Danielle's token without direct approval. Owen also revealed that Caleb frequently delivered blank attendance sheets, which Vanessa's staff later completed from old participant lists. Vanessa's scheme depended on cooperation, carelessness, and employees who feared losing their jobs more than they trusted the hotline. When investigators questioned Caleb, he blamed Vanessa for the false invoices, but insisted much of the money paid real business debts and staff wages. He provided access to the event company's accounts, where Lena found that Vanessa had taken several large transfers, but not the full missing amount. The remaining money had not financed Danielle's nonprofit, as Vanessa claimed. It had been returned to the Women's Renewal account through anonymous repayments during the previous month. Someone had realized the theft was about to be discovered and had begun putting the money back before Danielle ever entered the jewelry boutique. The repayments came from Ethan's personal investment account, authorized in 4 transfers he insisted he had never seen. His finance office routinely processed large transactions after receiving approval from his executive assistant, and Vanessa had gained temporary access to that system while organizing overseas travel. The discovery made Ethan look less like an accomplice, but more like a man whose wealth and carelessness had allowed others to move around him without resistance. Vanessa had apparently begun returning money after learning that Danielle planned to revive the program independently and might request old records. She was not executing a flawless long-term strategy. She was trying to repair a theft that had grown beyond what she could conceal. Lena reconstructed the most likely sequence through emails and payment dates. Vanessa first hired Caleb's struggling company to provide genuine events, then inflated invoices when his debts worsened. She justified the early overbilling as temporary support and planned to replace the money before anyone noticed. Caleb became dependent on the payments. Vanessa covered the gap with additional false vendors, and each attempt to correct the problem created another record that required hiding. The affair began later, when Ethan's attention made access easier and convinced Vanessa that he would protect her from questions. She had not seduced him as part of a perfect criminal design, but once the relationship began, she used the trust he gave her and the secrecy he wanted. Danielle found that explanation more believable and more disturbing than a brilliant conspiracy. The damage came from ordinary compromises, repeated until nobody involved could admit where they had started. Ethan had chosen admiration over honesty. Vanessa had chosen concealment over consequences. Caleb had chosen survival over integrity. And Danielle had allowed her name to remain attached to work she no longer supervised. Their failures were not equal, but they had occupied the same neglected space. The board offered Ethan a path back if he supported a statement blaming Vanessa and Caleb for everything. The company would acknowledge weak controls, reimburse the program, and describe Ethan as another victim of deception. He read the proposal inside the temporary apartment where he had been staying since Danielle asked him to leave the townhouse. Years earlier, he would have accepted because the statement protected employees, investors, and the company's reputation. Now he recognized how quickly powerful people placed innocent livelihoods around themselves when accountability approached. Ethan rejected the statement and requested that the company disclose the ignored reports, the reused security token, and the lack of independent oversight. He also admitted that his relationship with Vanessa compromised his judgment after warning signs appeared. Several directors accused him of destroying the business to impress a wife who intended to divorce him. Ethan answered that Danielle had not requested the disclosure and might never forgive him, which was precisely why doing the right thing could no longer depend on what it earned. Danielle faced a similar choice when a major foundation offered to restore funding for her Brooklyn initiative if she publicly separated herself from every failure at Calloway Capital. The proposed statement described her as a respected founder whose name had been used without her knowledge. That was mostly true, but it omitted that Danielle had retained signing authority for years while trusting Ethan's employees to manage the work. Margaret warned that admitting poor oversight could weaken Danielle's legal position. Danielle understood, yet she could not build a financial education program by pretending symbolic responsibility required no attention. She spoke publicly from the unfinished office beside Erica and Owen, refusing the polished stage offered by a public relations firm. Danielle denied approving false payments and released the evidence showing misuse of her security token. She also admitted that she had allowed a program carrying her name to operate without independent review because she trusted the company built inside her marriage. Reporters asked whether Ethan had stolen money, whether Vanessa targeted her personally, and whether the frozen card had exposed the fraud. Danielle answered only what the evidence supported. "The card exposed my husband's affair," she said. "The investigation exposed a failure involving more people than one marriage." The honesty changed the story. Employees who had remained silent began contacting investigators, and donors agreed to wait for the final report before withdrawing support. Vanessa's attorney requested negotiations after learning Owen had preserved her instructions. During a monitored interview, Vanessa admitted using Danielle's token and approving false invoices, but claimed she intended to replace every dollar before the program suffered. Danielle asked why Vanessa had tried to blame her. Vanessa looked exhausted rather than defiant. "Because I thought he would protect you before he protected me," she said. Ethan answered before Danielle could. "I should have protected the truth before either of you needed protection from me." Vanessa accepted responsibility for fraud, identity theft, and falsifying program records under an agreement requiring full repayment and cooperation against Caleb's company. Caleb faced separate charges after admitting that he submitted false invoices and pressured employees to create attendance records. Neither outcome felt triumphant to Danielle, because punishment could not restore the workshops canceled, the grants reduced, or the trust lost by women who had already learned to expect institutions to disappoint them. The recovered funds allowed the Women's Renewal Project to reopen, but the board placed it under independent management rather than returning control to Danielle or Ethan. Calloway Capital survived, though the damage did not disappear after Vanessa's confession. The audit revealed that several executives had ignored concerns because the foundation produced favorable publicity and required little attention from senior leadership. Ethan returned temporarily under an outside monitor, dismissed the chief financial officer who had closed Owen's complaint, and committed personal shares to cover losses the recovered money did not address. He announced no grand cultural transformation because employees had heard enough promises from executives facing consequences. Instead, the company published complaints, response times, and foundation expenses each quarter, allowing outsiders to measure whether anything had changed. Danielle's Brooklyn initiative opened with 18 students instead of the 60 she had planned. The credit line remained suspended for months. 2 employees accepted safer jobs elsewhere, and legal expenses consumed most of the reserve. Erica supplied food for evening classes, while Owen volunteered to build a simple payment review system because he wanted to repair something without pretending his earlier obedience had been harmless. Danielle accepted the help reluctantly, then realized she still associated independence with carrying every burden alone. That belief had kept her beside Ethan long after partnership became performance. One student, Maya Thompson, worked nights in a hospital billing department and hoped to open an accounting service for families overwhelmed by medical debt. Her business plan was thoughtful, but a lender rejected the application because years of caring for her mother had damaged her credit. Maya stopped attending classes and ignored Danielle's calls until Danielle found her outside the hospital after a night shift. She did not offer money or a speech about believing in herself. They sat on a concrete bench, drank bad coffee, and reduced the plan until Maya could begin with 3 clients and a rented desk instead of an office. Maya returned the following week, Her smaller business did not resemble the future she had imagined, but it belonged to her and could grow without debt she could not afford. The lesson reached Danielle as directly as it reached Maya. Rebuilding did not require replacing the old life with something larger. Sometimes it required creating one honest thing small enough to protect. The first class graduated inside the unfinished office, beneath fluorescent lights that flickered whenever the coffee machine ran. Erica brought bread from her bakery, families carried folding chairs upstairs, and Maya announced that a community lender had approved her revised application. Danielle stepped into the supply room afterward and cried quietly, allowing relief to move through her without converting it into a lesson. She had spent years attending galas where applause felt important, yet nothing had matched the sound of 18 women explaining what they intended to do next. Her divorce mediation with Ethan began the following month. He did not ask for another chance or describe Vanessa as the reason he had betrayed their marriage. He admitted that admiration had become easier than being known by someone who remembered the person beneath his success. Danielle told him the affair ended what remained, but the marriage had been weakening each time he treated her honesty as opposition and her loyalty as something already secured. They transferred the private partnership account into an independent trust that neither could control alone. The trust would fund financial education through several organizations, including Danielle's, but every grant required outside approval. Ethan offered Danielle the townhouse, and she accepted only after buying his share under terms Margaret considered fair. She wanted no final gift that could later be remembered as rescue. Before signing the divorce papers, Ethan apologized for expecting Danielle to protect the life they built while he protected himself from discomfort. Danielle accepted the apology without softening the decision. He asked whether she believed he could change. She said change was possible, but it did not return years to the people who had paid for the lesson. They left through separate doors because the mediation office opened onto two hallways. Neither looked back, and neither needed the other to. 3 years later, the Harper Financial Independence Center opened inside a restored Brooklyn library that had nearly been converted into luxury offices. The organization served women rebuilding after divorce, caregiving, job loss, and long periods of financial dependence. Though Danielle resisted expanding faster than its staff could protect the quality of each program. Maya directed a medical debt counseling service from the second floor, Erica's bakery catered community workshops, and Owen managed compliance under a board that reviewed his work as closely as everyone else's. No founder, donor, or executive could approve a payment alone, including Danielle. Calloway Capital remained profitable, but smaller, after selling several divisions and accepting permanent outside oversight of its charitable programs. Ethan stepped down as chief executive once the reforms stabilized, then joined a regional investment firm where employees held voting shares. He attended therapy, rebuilt damaged relationships, and learned that private improvement did not obligate anyone to revise their judgment of his past. Some former employees respected his changes, while others never trusted him again. Ethan stopped treating that distance as an injustice he needed to correct. He attended the center's opening without assistants, photographers, or a reserved chair. The independent trust had contributed to the building restoration, but no room carried the Calloway name. Danielle noticed him near the back, while Maya spoke about families who avoided bankruptcy after learning to challenge medical bills. Ethan applauded with everyone else, then waited until the students and guests had left before approaching Danielle in an empty classroom. Their conversation began with ordinary things because time had removed the need to make every meeting symbolic. Ethan asked about Maya's program. Danielle asked whether he still traveled every week, and they laughed when the lights flickered as the coffee machine started downstairs. The warmth between them no longer frightened Danielle because she did not confuse kindness with invitation. Ethan congratulated her on the center and admitted that its smaller, careful growth made him reconsider how often he had treated expansion as proof of value. He carried a plain envelope containing the anniversary note and the expired black card, both returned after the investigation closed. Danielle read the faded promise once, remembering the rooftop dinner where Ethan had given it to her when their future contained more hope than money. She did not tell herself the promise had always been false. Ethan had meant it then, but sincerity at the beginning had not excused neglect afterward. Ethan asked whether she had forgiven him. Danielle answered that forgiveness had come gradually, mostly on days when she realized his choices no longer shaped her own. His face softened, though he did not interpret the answer as a path back to her. He told her he had once believed remorse should earn restoration if it became deep enough. Therapy taught him that remorse existed to change the person who caused harm, not to purchase access to the person who survived it. Danielle placed the anniversary note inside the center's private archive because it belonged to the organization's history, complicated and unfinished as that history was. She cut the black card through the chip and magnetic strip, then dropped the pieces into a secure disposal container. There was no audience for the gesture beyond Ethan, and she felt no surge of revenge. The card had already done everything it could do. A nervous young woman named Tasha appeared in the doorway with Maya, carrying the final paperwork for a home-based childcare business. Danielle reviewed the agreement, then sent it to Owen for the second approval required by policy. When the grant cleared, Maya handed Tasha a debit card connected to the new business account. Tasha asked whether she needed permission before purchasing equipment, worried that making the wrong decision would cause the center to withdraw its support. "The account belongs to your business," Danielle said. "You make the decisions, and we help you understand the consequences before they become emergencies." Tasha smiled, holding the card with both hands as though it weighed more than plastic. Ethan watched from beside the classroom door and recognized the difference between the card he had once given Danielle and the one Tasha now carried. His gift had promised shared ownership, while quietly depending on trust he later stopped earning. Tasha's card came with knowledge, boundaries, and control. No relationship could remove without explanation. Ethan thanked Danielle for allowing him to attend, then left before his regret could become the final subject of her day. Danielle watched him cross the lobby and felt affection for the man he had worked to become, but no desire to reopen the marriage that had taught both of them its limits. Some endings remained kind without becoming reversible. That evening, Danielle walked through the quiet center, turning off lights in classrooms filled with budget plans, business ideas, and names written across future appointment calendars. The black card was gone, Vanessa's scheme was over, and Ethan finally understood what he had lost. None of those things defined Danielle's peace. She locked the front door and stepped into the Brooklyn night, carrying tomorrow's lesson plans beneath her arm. Her future had not begun when someone recognized her value. It began when she stopped allowing another person's choices to determine what she was permitted to build.